Hey, my name is Abby Petty, and this is my Xtreme Makeover PowerPoint for NU13, Organizational and System Leadership for the Advanced Practice Nurse. The purpose of this assignment is to discuss a time when miscommunication occurred in my workplace and discuss the issues that occurred leading up to the situation. We will discuss the importance of communication in the workplace and its role in innovation. I will briefly discuss what it means to utilize organization as conversation, patterns of meaning and patterns of relating, their roles in communication, what it means to lead your organization relationally, ways of talking, listening, and mindfulness, and we will end by discussing how these things influence innovation, which is what we should be directing our focus on moving forward because healthcare is always changing. Here are the learning outcomes for this discussion. You can read these above before we move on. The goal I have for this presentation is to transform your ways of communication in the workplace with your peers and coworkers so that we can move in the direction of innovation and teamwork. So here's the story, the full story. I'm going to give you just kind of like an overview of what happened, so because we're cut for time. But basically, I had a 4-patient assignment. One morning, one of the fire departments had brought me a patient that was a psych patient because I had the only psych room, and the psych room is just, you can't have a medical patient in there. There's no monitor. The bed's secured to the floor. Everything's plastic. The door can be locked from the outside. But the fire department brought me an autistic patient who was nonverbal in 4-point restraints. And the fireman had asked me if they wanted me to keep him in restraints when they moved him over to the bed, which you know that you have to have a doctor's order to have restraints. So I left the room, went to go talk to the doctor. The doctor was at his desk. He was doing multiple things. We were really busy. He was typing on his computer. I gave him a report, a background, history, autistic, and asked him if he wanted the restraints on. The patient basically just told, or the doctor basically just told me to take the restraints off since the mother was in there. So I went back to the room, took the restraints off, let the fireman leave. So after that, I just did my basic assessment, my vital signs. I brought him all the comfort items. I offered like coloring book, all those things. We gave him blanket and food, water and juice. Just kind of trying to pass the time till the doctor could come in there and see him. Well, about 2 hours went by. The patient still hadn't been seen. So I had to go look for the doctor. Couldn't find the doctor. Because I could hear him in there getting like restless and worked up. And I knew I didn't have like very long before the patient was going to get out of hand. So I went to go find the other doctors that were in the front of the ER to ask them if they could just come evaluate the situation and try to calm the patient down. They basically dismissed me, told me that they didn't sign up for that patient, and I need to go find the other doctor. Well, you can read the rest of the story from what happened after that, but it's basically the whole situation could have been avoided if communication would have been on point and the doctor would have gone and evaluated the patient himself. So now let's talk about what went wrong, where the miscommunication occurred. After hearing the example, we noticed miscommunication started with the physician misunderstanding the patient's condition, failure by the nurse to communicate the high-risk situation, failure of the physician to evaluate the patient, and failure by the nurse to re-inform the doctor after that initial report had been given and time had passed. So obviously we pick up that the doctor wasn't either paying attention, multitasking, working on his computer, not listening to the report. This often happens when nurses give a report on psych patients because there's just so many. We just see them so often for inappropriate reasons. So he's probably just like, oh, it's another psych patient. Themes that we can note in the conversation are providers not listening to nurses. The patient was not evaluated in a timely manner. A lot of times these type of patients are put on the back burner, like I said, being the last person they need to see. However, the fact that the patient has an underlying history of autism and being nonverbal should have been a red flag for the physician. But he most likely dismissed the situation just because of the high volume of patients that we see with psych disorders in the ER. And last, the nurse left unsupported and unsafe when she had to go find another doctor or PA that wouldn't even listen to her concerns because they had not signed up for the patient. And like I said, that's often an issue that we run into in the ER. These conversation themes expose a culture in my organization in which nurses feel undervalued, undersupported by physicians, lack of room for innovation because there's no one listening to them, a feeling of mistrust from staff, which leads to nurse turnover because no one enjoys working in that type of environment. Let's discuss organization as conversation and what that means. Utilizing an organization as conversation style of leadership means that everyone is thinking and working together to achieve one goal, which is, in my organization, being patient-centered care and patient satisfaction. This type of leadership is open to innovation and open communication, not just led by one person, but able to collaborate with each other to make decisions and share ideas. Organization as conversation can be broken down into patterns of meaning and patterns of relating. Patterns of meaning refers simply to the mission and vision of the organization. Like I stated in the prior slide, my mission's organization is to provide patient-centered care and promote patient satisfaction. We see here are some examples from our situation that we failed to do this, like the physician not evaluating our patient in a timely manner. Patterns of relating refers to how people interact with each other within the organization. In my ER, we use a chain of command. Again, I've listed examples from our current example on ways we have failed to interact and communicate with one another. Creating an organization as conversation type of leadership calls for relational leading. Relational leading refers to utilizing each other and collaborating with an entire group rather than one individual that is separate and only utilizes their one perspective. Collaborative decision-making, multiple opinions and perspectives, respectful communication between everyone in the organization working towards the same goal. On this slide, we notice the term making meaning. Making meaning is knowledge created through the social act of relating, so basically discussion amongst many people. We know that meaning is made from experience that occurs in the present right now. Our choices and intentions for the present, however, are formulated by our past experiences. Meaning is created in response to gestures which can be emotional, personal reflection, or explanation. A response to a gesture creates meaning. As we remember from the slides before, patterns of meaning refers to the organization's mission and vision. My organization's mission being providing patient-centered care. In our situation, the nurse expressed concern regarding the acuity of the patient and need for evaluation due to autism and being nonverbal who arrived in restraints. However, the doctor dismissed the situation and didn't evaluate the patient for almost 2 hours. This left the nurse feeling mistrusted, undervalued, and places the patient in a higher situation. Communication is key in healthcare and the ability to create an organization as conversation of culture. However, we must communicate appropriately and effectively. Speaking and talking can have a negative impact if we are not aware of our words. We must choose language intentionally, having intentional conversations. Ways of speaking can stabilize and reinforce culture. Having conversations presents opportunities for reinforcing existing values and norms, as well as influence for change and innovation. In order for use to intentionally speak and have conversations, we must listen and listen effectively. Listening is a collaborative process utilizing both gestures and responses. When listening, one must be present in the moment and paying attention. Using eye contact is a good way to promote active listening. As we heard in our example, the nurse asked the doctor, gave a report. However, the only response she got was to take the patient out of restraints, all while the doctor was typing on his computer. Mindfulness is our last topic on this slide, which we can refer back to what I just said about the doctor typing on the computer while she was speaking. Mindfulness requires being present in the moment, being aware of what you're doing while someone is speaking. Being mindful gives you the opportunity to be present in the conversation. If the doctor had been more mindful in the conversation, he might have understood the nurse's concerns for the situation. The idea of innovation refers to using different people, different ideas, and sharing multiple conversations and opinions in order to create or develop a new meaning, new idea, new patterns, and forward thinking. An idea of saying yes to the mess created by Frank Barrett basically refers to you dwelling in the chaos, letting go of control, being open to change and the potential of other opportunities rather than messianistic planning, which is just one way of thinking, using both and thinking, referring to more than one way of doing something. Oftentimes, the barrier to innovation is shame and fear of rejection. A lot of times, most organizations are run with the messianistic mindset, with only one way of thinking. Some doctors are also this way and make it hard and terrifying to speak up and bring forth ideas for innovation. In order to change the story and cultivate a culture of organization, as conversation, I would use patterns of meaning and relating to promote the organization's mission. I've listed here the main points of organization as conversation that we discussed earlier. Implementing this in my organization would create an environment of we rather than I and cultivate more purposeful relationships between physicians and nurses. To improve our patterns of meaning would mean to focus on promoting the organization's mission, which is to provide patient-centered care, which requires teamwork, and encourage conversations. Doing so leads to innovation, can transform meaning, and create multiple perspectives. To improve patterns of relation, we must first change the stigma between physicians and nurses. As nurses spend a lot of time and see much more of the patients than the physicians and providers do. I also think it is important to remember that we are working together on the same team. We must work together and listen to one another in order to provide exceptional patient-centered care. Using relational leading in this area would also greatly improve our outcomes. Relational leading means to lead using the word we method more than I or me. Moving forward, in order to achieve these patterns of meaning and relating, we must remember the importance of language, because how we speak, how we listen, and how mindful we are of conversations. We must choose language intentionally, listen attentive to one another, and be aware of ourselves and those around us. Lastly, to promote and improve the idea of innovation in our organization, we must first be open to others' ideas, say yes to the mess, stop trying to be in control of all discussion situations, encourage other suggestions, and have discussions and conversation, whether they are tough conversations or not. We must also promote and build relationships amongst each other, regardless of our job titles, and lastly, create an environment where everyone can be comfortable sharing ideas and thoughts and not be dumbed down or belittled. After discussing and utilizing the topics we discussed in the PowerPoint, this is how the story could be recreated to create a better outcome and utilize the effective communication. One morning in the ER, a nurse had a 4-patient assignment. One of her rooms is noted to be a room for psych patients. That room cannot be used for medical patients. One of the local fire departments had brought in a teenager who had a history of autism and was also nonverbal. The fire department had the patient in 4-point restraints. On arrival, when the patient arrived to the room, the nurse went to receive a report from the fireman. She noticed that the patient was in restraints and also that the nurse was present. The fireman proceeded to ask if we wanted to continue the restraints after moving the patient from the stretcher to the bed. As many of you know, in order to place a patient in restraints, you must have a doctor's order. And the doctor must lay eyes on the patient within 1 hour of placing restraints. At this point, the nurse walks out of the room to ask the doctor who would be seeing the patient if the restraints needed to be continued. She would give a full report to the doctor explaining how the patient is nonverbal, acting violent at home, with a history of autism, and that the mother is present in the room at the time. At this point, the physician would walk to the room with the nurse and assess and lay eyes on the patient. At this time, the doctor would state that it is okay to remove the restraints, explain to the mother the policy for psych admission, get a background history on the patient, and place orders for the patient after returning to his desk. The nurse would proceed to attain vital signs and complete any orders that the doctor placed. The nurse would then assure that all patients' comfort needs were met so that the patient could feel as at home and comfortable as possible as we waited for the next step in the process. So the patient was brought a blanket for comfort, juice, and snacks. The nurse would assure comfort by rounding approximately every 30 minutes if possible and communicating with the doctor on the patient's behavior if necessary. After rounding on the patient and noticing the patient starting to get restless, the nurse would then go to the doctor and update the patient's behavior, asking him to place an order for medication